What's up everyone and welcome to today's video. I have a really exciting one today because I'll be ranking all of the mainline Final Fantasy games. This one is sure to ruffle some feathers and I honestly had a tough time with this list for sure, especially when it came to that top 3 or so. Now this list may change for me sometimes depending on what I'm in the mood for, but this is one of my all-time favorite series and honestly the series that got me into JRPGs. A couple of quick things I want to note really quick is I am going to be looping in the sequels to the mainline games into one entry on this list. So for example, 10 and 10-2 and the 13 series of games, I will do this because I feel like while each game is different, I think back on them as one experience, one that I had with the world and the characters, and so that's why I'll be doing that here. I also want to mention that this list will feature single player entries only, so the MMOs like 11 and 14 won't be featured here, but I have played them extensively, so if anyone wants some videos around the Final Fantasy spin-offs or the MMOs, then please let me know in the comments below and I will make that happen for you. Now with all that said, let's jump right into the list. All right, first up on the list I have Final Fantasy II. Look, there's an argument to be made that none of the mainline Final Fantasy games are inherently bad. But being that we are ranking them top to bottom, I have to put one at the bottom, and for me, Final Fantasy II fits the bill. The main thing that puts this game here is its progression system that I really dislike. Instead of doing the typical leveling and upgrading a character's stats as you progress in the game, it uses a proficiency-based system where each character's individual stats like HP, magic, stamina, etc. level up based on the actions you do, which can easily be cheesed in a multitude of ways. For example, you might find yourself repetitively attacking your own party members to increase HP or engaging in unnecessary grinding to balance the character's abilities, and this overall makes for an experience that had me questioning the design decision all the way through. I just don't understand how this game came to be this way. I really don't like it. Not to say that this game shouldn't be experienced at all, but the gameplay left a lot to be desired. I also wasn't a huge fan of Final Fantasy II's story or characters. The narrative struggles with pacing and many characters feel really underdeveloped, making it really hard for me to form a meaningful connection with the main characters. Of all the classic Final Fantasy games, this one is largely the least interesting in my opinion, and when I recently made my way through all the games in the pixel remasters, this was the most difficult one for me to get through. Alright, moving on, we have Final Fantasy. The first game in the series is next up on the list. Look, this is still a great game, don't get me wrong, but this one just doesn't age well. The new pixel remasters with the quality of life improvements make some of the older mechanics and design choices tolerable, but overall, if you go back and play the original, it's tough to get through. Its difficulty can be rough as it requires extensive grinding and meticulous management of really quite limited resources. Additionally, some of its mechanics and user interface elements are really tough to navigate. While the plot is relatively straightforward by today's standards, especially in the more modern Final Fantasy games, it was very innovative for its time. All in all, the original and its issues lie with the fact that it just doesn't really age all that well. And it's not near the level of timeless classic status that many of the others on this list achieved, but this was still an amazing game for its time. This kicked off one of the most incredible game franchises, full stop, and it deserves massive credit for that. If you're going to give it a go, then the Pixel Remaster is definitely the best way to do it. Use the quality of life and accessibility options to customize the experience to your liking, and it'll make for a much better playthrough. Alright, moving on, I have Final Fantasy III. There's actually quite a lot of things I love about this game, but it's ultimately brought down by a story that really didn't hit with me. The world is also largely forgettable, and I was looking forward to this game when it released on the DS, but was ultimately let down. It's not all bad though. Final Fantasy III did introduce the job system though, which is a huge aspect of modern JRPGs and one of my favorite mechanics when used in clever ways. I'm going to keep drawing references to the pixel remasters for these because that's the best way to play these older games in my opinion, and of the ones featured in that collection, I feel like the story and characters are the weakest in Final Fantasy III. Overall, this game is a landmark title that introduced some pivotal innovations in the series and the RPG genre at large, Its deep job system and other mechanics make it a significant chapter in the Final Fantasy franchise, but one that ultimately didn't grab me for the reasons I mentioned here. All right, moving on, it's time for me to talk about my least favorite modern Final Fantasy game, and it's 15. This game made my disappointing JRPGs list recently, so go check that out if you haven't yet. But I really wanted to love this game. I just couldn't. One of the most glaring issues is the game's narrative. Despite a promising start, the story quickly becomes disjointed and confusing, leaving so many plot points underdeveloped or outright abandoned. Key story elements are scattered across different media, forcing you to watch a film and an anime series to fully grasp the plot, which detracts from the game's overall cohesiveness. I will say that I did enjoy the combat, and the game was graphically very impressive, but that didn't make up for the downfalls in my opinion. Final Fantasy 15 has some real highs and some real lows, where I felt like I was enjoying myself at times, but at others was completely let down, not only by the story, but the questing and moment-to-moment gameplay left a lot to be desired. A lot of it was fetch quests, I was roaming around an empty world, the combat became repetitive because of the pacing of the game. There were just a lot of issues I had with Final Fantasy 15, and I really didn't resonate with the main protagonist either. Overall, this is one of the low points in the series for me. All right, next up on the list, I have Final Fantasy 16. Now, we are getting into the top 10 here and starting to get to the point where from here on out, I thoroughly enjoyed these games. Some of them are flawed in certain areas, but overall, I look back on these with good memories. Final Fantasy 16 is a tough one because this game probably feels the least like a Final Fantasy game, but the combat is a ton of fun, and I really liked the story and characters. This game has a much darker tone, and it's much more violent than others in the series, so from start to finish, it just feels a lot different. The combat system represents a significant departure from previous titles, embracing this fast-paced, action-oriented gameplay reminiscent of like Devil May Cry or other character-based action games. The battles are dynamic and visually spectacular, with fluidity that keeps me engaged from moment to moment. The humongous, crazy scaled icon battles are particularly noteworthy, offering this like massive cinematic showdown that really feels truly epic in scale. I mean, I think Final Fantasy 16 features some of the coolest boss fights, not only in the series, but in games in general. The one negative I could give the combat though is that more skilled players are not going to feel all that challenged here, and the hard mode, at least when I played it, can't be unlocked until the second playthrough. All in all, Final Fantasy 16 is a bold, visually stunning entry that successfully blends new and old elements. It offers a fresh take on the series while maintaining the incredible storytelling and rich world building that fans come to expect. Despite some deviations that may not appeal to everyone, it stands as a strong, memorable addition to the Final Fantasy franchise in my opinion, and I did have a great time playing through the main story. All right, next up on the list is Final Fantasy V, and for me, one of the huge main reasons I love this game is the job system. This right here, in my opinion, is probably the best job system in the series. I think that Final Fantasy V has the unfortunate case of being released between two of the best games in the series in 4 and 6, but 5 definitely deserves some love. This game's job system significantly expands the series' RPG mechanics in completely unprecedented ways. This innovation isn't just noteworthy for the ridiculously powerful combos it allows you to create. The job system here was the first time I felt like each party member felt like one that I created. The customization here really brought things to the next level, and I love Final Fantasy V for that. Like many of the other early games in the series, there can be some difficulty spikes and points in the game that feel unreasonably challenging and require a ton of grinding, but for someone like me who enjoys grinding, especially with a job system like this, it wasn't an issue. While the plot is relatively straightforward and lacks the emotional depth of some of the other entries in here, it is lifted up by charming characters and moments of humor. The narrative may not be the series' strongest by any means, but it serves as a solid backdrop for the gameplay, which I think is the star of the show in this one, and why it sits so highly on this list. All right, moving on, I have Final Fantasy 13. I'm looping in the whole 13 saga here. Some entries are definitely better than others, but overall, despite the linearity and long lead up to the game really shining, I think this is a great Final Fantasy game. I feel like this right here is where Final Fantasy took a turn, and many of the fans of the series started feeling let down by each release. The game's strengths really lie in its high production values and combat system. The graphics are breathtaking, especially for the time, and even hold up super well with detailed character models and really well-crafted environments. The soundtrack is equally impressive. I just really enjoyed what this game had to offer and think it's one of the games in the series that's just a bit underrated. The combat system, known as this paradigm shift, is a highlight for me. It allows you to switch between different roles in real time, promoting a strategic approach to battles, and requires quick decision making during boss fights, which many of the boss fights I loved more than a lot of the games in the series. Final Fantasy XIII offers a visually spectacular and mechanically impressive experience, but really falls short in terms of narrative clarity and freedom of exploration. It remains a polarizing title that really pushes the series in creative new directions, and ones that fans of the series should really give another chance. I am really shocked that Square Enix chose to make so many Final Fantasy XIII games, and like I said before, some of them are better than others. I really liked Final Fantasy XIII too, but didn't care much for Lightning Returns. But overall, the series together, when they are played as one cohesive experience, make for a really good time. All right, next up on the list is Final Fantasy IV. This story is incredible and one that has stuck with me over the years. I love the world, I love the characters, the story and its pacing. It's all so well executed. In terms of overall experience and presentation, Final Fantasy IV was just amazing. It brought incredible visuals, an amazing soundtrack, and a new active time battle system that added a real-time element to combat, making battles more dynamic. I mean, this kind of set the stage for future entries and became a hallmark of the series with future releases. Going back and playing the game, some people may feel that the story is cliche and some of the mechanics feel dated, but for the time, there was really nothing like it. This game kind of set the stage for JRPGs that focused on each aspect of the game beyond just deep RPG mechanics. I love Final Fantasy IV, and it truly is an incredible experience from start to finish. It's a classic that excels in each aspect, and it's supported by innovative gameplay mechanics. Despite some difficulty spikes, just like I said, these older Final Fantasy games do require some grinding. This one is a bit more linear than some of the others. It just remains a beloved and influential entry in the series. It's so well worth playing. Definitely don't miss Final Fantasy IV. All right, moving on. Next up, I have Final Fantasy XII. There's a lot of really interesting things done in this entry right here. The story, the characters, and especially the combat system are all very unique, and I felt like mechanically this was one of the biggest changes the series had seen up to this point. One of the game's most notable features is its gambit system, which allows you to customize the AI behavior of the party members, creating this highly strategic combat experience. I mean, this system, combined with the seamless transition between exploration and battles, offers a fluid and engaging gameplay loop that breaks away from the series' traditional turn-based formula. I really loved it, and it's one of those things that I love Final Fantasy games for, is that in each entry, they really try to take risks and they change things up. No Final Fantasy game feels the same, and at the same time, no Final Fantasy game feels more different than 12. I love 12 for that. Moving on to the narrative, it's much more mature and complex. It focuses on some pretty intricate themes and storytelling. The story is supported by well-developed characters, pretty strong voice acting, and although I personally found the political plot less emotionally engaging than some of the more character-driven stories, I also wasn't a huge fan of the main protagonist in 12, but overall the moment-to-moment gameplay, new combat system, all that made everything worth it. Final Fantasy 12 is just a blast to play, and that's why it's so high on this list. All right, next up, I have Final Fantasy VIII. I really enjoyed Final Fantasy VIII for a ton of reasons. I feel like 8 isn't spoke about a ton as one of the best in the series, but it is in my top 5, and I really enjoyed it. One of the standout features of Final Fantasy VIII is its junction system, which allows you to equip magical spells to enhance your character's stats and abilities. This system, combined with customizable summons, offers a deep and flexible approach to your character development. However, the reliance on drawing magic from enemies and the complexity of the system can be really off-putting at first, and it does take some real effort to master, but when you do, it's a ton of fun. I've always been a fan of the unique and complex gameplay and combat systems. It's one of the reasons I love Xenoblade, for example. So when a JRPG tries to introduce something new and unique, and it's on the more complex side, I find myself really intrigued, and I really try to master those. And it's why I had a ton of fun with this game. The narrative is both a strength and a weakness though. While the sort of romantic subplot tries to add emotional depth, it doesn't really pay off in any significant way. The overall story can be convoluted, and it can be difficult to follow at times, particularly with its time travel elements. I just felt like Final Fantasy VIII could get lost in its sauce on occasion. The character development of the main protagonist, though, is compelling and makes up for some of the complex themes that can be more difficult to follow. The story has some real highs, though, and even with the low points, the gameplay and the high points of the story make up for it. Final Fantasy VIII is a visually impressive and narratively ambitious entry in the series that stands out for its unique systems and emotional depth. While it may turn fans off with its more complex mechanics and convoluted story, it remains a memorable and distinctive entry in the Final Fantasy series, and one that I thoroughly enjoyed. All right, next up on the list is Final Fantasy VII. I want to say that these right here, from here on out, can all be switched around, and I feel good about the list. These final games on the list all are some of the best in JRPGs and should be played by everyone, in my opinion. Now back to Final Fantasy VII, likely the most popular game in the series, especially with the popularity of the recent remake and how incredibly recognizable everything related to Final Fantasy VII is. In fact, I do know that some people that don't follow Final Fantasy at all really recognize 7 as like the Final Fantasy game. With all that said, I love this game, but it isn't at the top spot for me. For me, the best and most recognizable aspect of Final Fantasy, and the reason I consistently come back to it, is its story. Its richly developed characters and their complex past drive a narrative filled with emotional highs and super dramatic twists. The game's plot is further enhanced by its detailed world building and immersive setting. I mean, I love the city of Midgar, Cosmo Canyon, and just the way these things were brought to life in modern ways with the remake, with Rebirth. I mean, Final Fantasy VII has just been amazing. This game also introduced the materia system, which allows you to customize your character's abilities by equipping magical orbs. This system offers a high degree of flexibility and strategic depth, making battles engaging and quite varied. I love the amount of customizability that materia gives you, and I appreciate how well the remakes handled the materia system in the new games. I just really wanted to note that because it was such an important aspect of the game to me, in my opinion. The turn-based combat, while traditional, is executed with flair and impressive summon animations, and even featured dynamic limit breaks. Visually, I feel like 7 holds up worse than probably any of the others in the series though. Thankfully, the remakes are incredible set pieces, but going back to the original can be really tough in my opinion. It was indeed revolutionary for its time, but older PS1 games in general just don't hold up all that well, with blocky character models, low resolution textures. Additionally, some of the translation and dialogue can be pretty awkward. Overall, though, Final Fantasy VII is a seminal RPG that left an incredible mark on the gaming industry. I mean, its compelling narrative, innovative mechanics, and unbelievable music make it a timeless classic, and with good reason. All right, moving on. Next up on the list is Final Fantasy IX. This game has a richly developed world that is filled with whimsical towns, ancient ruins, vibrant environments. I mean, the game's art direction with its stylized character designs and super cool environments really is the only Final Fantasy game in the series that feels rooted in a fantasy setting. I love it for that. Final Fantasy IX is incredible, and honestly, the narrative as well is really well done and one of the best stories in the series in my opinion. The character development and writing are incredible, and I thoroughly enjoy discovering new things each time I go back and play it. The gameplay in Final Fantasy IX combines traditional turn-based combat with the unique trance system, which enhances each character's abilities when their gauge is filled. The game also features an ability learning system tied to the equipment, adding a layer of customization to your character's equipment, which, as I've mentioned before, I'm always a fan of. Overall, Final Fantasy IX is a delightful entry in the series that pays homage to the predecessors while introducing new and fresh ideas. Its endearing characters, super cool story, and amazing world make it an incredible classic that honestly anyone and everyone should play. I mean, I truly adore Final Fantasy IX and everything it does. It kind of takes the best aspects of what came before it and just tries to perfect them in a bunch of different ways. Play Final Fantasy IX. All right, time for the final two, and next up I have Final Fantasy VI. This is probably at the top of the list for most people, and rightfully so. This is an incredible game and easily one of the best JRPGs ever made. Final Fantasy VI is probably one of the best classic games to come back to. I mean, it holds up great, not just in visuals, but in its mechanics as well. The story is one of the game's strongest aspects, I think, having one of the most memorable storylines of any of the games, along with the most memorable villain in the series. The story is both complex and emotionally engaging. Each character is explored deeply, and the dialogue is super well written. Gameplay is pretty standard in terms of classic JRPGs. You have a turn-based battle system that is very polished and a ton of fun. Visually, the game has some of the best 16-bit graphics out there. I love this game's look and feel, and its meticulously designed sprites and environments that just bring everything to life. The soundtrack is also incredible. Just top to bottom, the production value and presentation in Final Fantasy VI are absolutely top-notch. This is one of the most polished and top to bottom, nearly flawless games in the series. I love this game, and it's one of the best JRPGs of all time, easily. All right, finally at the #1 spot, I have Final Fantasy X. And now I know this is probably going to draw some opinions from fans of the series out there, but this is my list, and 10 is just really incredible for me for so many reasons. I mean, the jump from 9 to 10 was likely the largest leap in the franchise, I think. Graphics, presentation, gameplay, setting, soundtrack, I could go on and on. This game was just an incredible marvel at the time of its release. I also just really like how different and unique it felt. Every Final Fantasy game changed things up. New story, new characters, new environments and mechanics, but this felt like an entirely different game. I was taken back every time I started this game up. One of the most interesting things in the gameplay was the sphere grid system for character progression, allowing for a different style of customization and strategy. The turn-based battle system is refined and polished, and allowed for the ability to switch party members in and out during combat, which I really enjoyed. I also got really into Blitzball for some reason. Like it was just a ton of fun through and through. This game top to bottom was so much fun. As I mentioned before, visually, this game was groundbreaking at the time of its release, featuring super detailed character models, amazing environments, and expressive facial animations. I know as we go through time and play games and get older, there were times in our life where we were like, how could a game look better than this? And Final Fantasy X was one of those moments for me as a kid. Obviously, games could look better, but at the time, I mean, we were all thinking it. Let's just be real. Final Fantasy X is a standout title in the series for a ton of reasons. It was praised for its emotional story, innovative and polished gameplay mechanics, and super impressive visuals. This is easily one of my all-time favorite games and one of my best gaming memories as a kid, so that's why it's at the top spot for me. If for whatever reason you haven't played Final Fantasy X, there is a multitude of ways to revisit it. Give this one a go. All right, everyone, that's it for my ranking of mainline Final Fantasy games. Like I said before, this was an incredibly hard list to make and one I don't take lightly. I love the series so much, and I revisit many of the games on this list quite regularly. I would love to see all your rankings as well, so leave them down in the comments below. Let me know how your opinions differ from mine, and if you want to chat more about the series, jump into my Discord. I'll leave a link down in the description below. That's it for me on this one, so until next time, I'm out.